This ritual takes place every inauguration. The Freemasons hold to this. It's going to take over whoever our president is. Now, this sounds crazy, but think about this. In ancient Egypt, what had happened was the Pharaoh would go through this ritual. He would enter in a man, and he would exit the ritual a god. That was their belief. And they believed that their Pharaoh was literally the embodiment of Osiris because of that ritual. They were calling him up out of the underworld. So what we have in America is this same ritual, basically, that the Freemasons believe that they have maintained the proper language and the ritual to a T from the ancient world. They claim to have this still today at the inauguration of every U.S. president. The president is up there, right there between the dome and the obelisk, right there in that power generator, and right around the corner at the Herodome, which is what they call the Masonic Mecca of the world, literally. The Herodome is this temple, this massive, crazy temple in D.C. They are up there beneath that magic square we were talking about, that magic 666 square, binding the influence and the power of the Word of God. They believe they're binding the power of the Bible while they do this ritual, and they are literally doing the raising of Osiris ritual while the presidential inauguration happens at every election. And they are literally calling on the spirit of Osiris to raise up, or Apollo, however you want to slice it, to come out of the underworld and to possess the president. So the president-elect walks into this ritual a man, exits the ritual a god. This is what the Freemasons believe. Now, people are going to say, well, not every president's a Freemason. Well, most of them have ties to secret societies, but they're not all conscious of the ritual. Doesn't matter. This ritual takes place every inauguration. The Freemasons hold to this. Here's one thing I want to point out about this. The ritual that takes place there, it's been going on now since the beginning, to our knowledge, since the beginning of this nation being set up. They believe that it's going to stick eventually. See, they don't know which president is going to be the final Osiris. Now, they believed in the foundation of this nation that Washington was a type. He was the first Osiris. Technically, every president in their eyes is an Osiris, but the crazy thing is that not every time the ritual is going to stick. They have to keep doing it until it actually sticks and they get that one that they've been waiting for.
So the deep state has three different levels. At first, you have the legislative branch and bureaucracy of spreading this ideology out on the world stage. Underneath that, you have the second level, which influences the first level. And so in that level, you have foreign governments, you have occult secret societies, your Skull and Bones, and etc. Then you also have your think tanks and all of those, and rich globalists that want to see their agenda make it to affect that first level. So that's the second level, and they're all influencing the first level. Underneath that is the spirit realm. So these people that are in the secret societies and occultists and want to see it put out on the first level, the world stage, they're going and they're doing these rituals, and we choose Bohemian Grove for that purpose because we don't have enough time to break down every secret society and their purposes and whatever. Ultimately, their goal is all the same. But at Bohemian Grove, it's like where the walls come down. That's where the ritual aspect of things come, and the third level of the deep state. So the third level is tapping into the spirit realm to be able to get your power and to be able to get your direction. And that influences the second level, and that influences the first level, and that's how it goes across the world scene to be enacted. Ultimately, Luciferianism, Satanism, these rituals to tap into the other side to get their direction. It's kind of like being a Christian. God gives us certain guidelines in His book. It's our basic instructions before leaving Earth. It's our guidelines to be able to make it here, right? I mean, we're lost without that. And so He gives us certain criteria on how to pray, how to communicate, how to worship. He gave in the Old Testament very specifics about how to build the temple. It's just one example. And so when you're dealing with the occult side of things, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. That's the occultists they're following just as diligently as a true believer of Christ follows Him, submits their life to Him, stays in the Word, lives the Word, right? Just as that diligence is, they're just as diligent, but it's for the opposite side. So with the occult, you've got these practices that have been passed down for millennia, And these people that are in power today are still practicing the same things. They're still wanting to see this system come in so that they can have their final go at taking over this world, destroying Christianity. Ultimately, it's not against us. I mean, yes, it is against humanity, but ultimately it's against God.
People say, well, what about George Washington? Because he's touted as such a man of integrity. Matter of fact, there's records that he attended church regularly, a Christian church. There's also records that he and his pastor, there's letters that have been written. Matter of fact, Library of Congress is a prime field to be picking truthful pieces of fruit. You want to get fruitful research? Hey, go to the Library of Congress. What we find out is that the pastor, one of Washington's pastors, he said that overall he spoke with Washington time and time again that Washington was a deist. Okay, Washington didn't want to have a problem with the guy. He wanted to continue going to the church because it was a political move. But in reality, Washington said he was a deist. They went back and forth on this matter. This has been documented historically. He was not a Christian. He was definitely a deist. Now, others will argue that Washington renounced the Masonic Lodge. Well, that's only a half-truth. Okay, he renounced the British Lodge. See, when he came over and started setting things up, like in this new era, if you will, he had to renounce the old to become part of the new. And so he was actually part of the Alexandrian Lodge. I forget the exact number of the lodge, but if you Google this, you're going to find out exactly which lodge Washington was a part of in Virginia. I think it might have been Lodge 122, but I forget. I don't want to quote that, but he renounced the British, joined on with the current lodge that was setting up in the New World. They were two separate systems. Now, they were very similar, but they were separate. Matter of fact, their idea was to come and set up a government here that was almost identical to the oligarchy that they left. See, most people don't realize that. They don't realize that Washington was part of a grand conspiracy to create basically a new oligarchy here, a government controlled by a few. And that's all historical. We document that in our film. But the idea was to set that up, but to give more freedoms. But it still allowed the elite to run everything that the government wants. Any move of the government, the elite were going to be involved. They were not going to allow the common man to make decisions. Matter of fact, when the Constitution and some of the founding documents were signed, those windows were locked. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis from the Pentagon, he came on record and he talked to us about this for the film. He points to the fact that the founding fathers were deep state, which we would call shadow government. Back to Washington. Washington was definitely a Freemason. Matter of fact, they cast sprigs of acacia at his Masonic funeral to signify him going on to the land of Osiris in the underworld. Now, they believed Osiris was already in the underworld, and they believed that Washington was the America's first Osiris, but he wasn't meant to be the final. He was meant to be a type. And we see that in how they went down and went through with his funeral. As a matter of fact, if you go back and study the death and the funerals of Washington, you're going to find out that there were two. You had two different eulogies. You want to look for the Masonic eulogy that was presented by Timothy Bigelow Jr. That literally paints the picture. Look, Washington was not just a porch mason. Okay, he knew what he was doing. He knew it. He was very much invested in this. We have evidence that not only was he a mason, but he was a mason in good standing all the way up until his death. A lot of people say he renounced the lodge. Again, he did, but it was the British Lodge, not the American Lodge. What's crazy about this is that he was literally being set up in a system that was a religious system that was set up to bring about the spirit of Osiris, a resurrected spirit, a reincarnated spirit, if you will, of Osiris, to possess the ruler of this nation. Washington never made it to the crypt. They did not put him in the crypt that they built for him because we believe they didn't build it for him. They said they did. But it's kind of like the government says that they're building, these military bases, and then immediately they retire the military base after they build it because they had other plans for it. The government does this all the time. They set up the crypt of Washington. They installed it very much strategically, which we break down all the strategy involved here. The crypt of Washington is sitting at it's a basement level of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. This is literally a page out of ancient Egyptian magic. We break this down step by step by step in the film. We show everything, how you go up and you walk into the Capitol building. You look up and what do you see in the dome? You see this thing called the apotheosis of George Washington. Now, if you really was a Christian, like so many people say, all you gotta do is look up and see the heaven that George Washington is ascending into, which is painted on this massive mural, and he's surrounded by all the pagan gods. You say, well, why on earth, if Washington was a Christian, why would he be getting deified in the first place into a god? That's what the word apotheosis means. Literally, Washington becoming a god. Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, said that George Washington was becoming the Osiris. Now, pagan gods, what does this have to do with DC? Well, Thomas Jefferson literally designed this city to honor the old pantheon of pagan gods. This is on record at the Library of Congress. People can investigate what's called the most approved plan. They literally built this city to pull a line from the Ghostbusters, how they talk about drawing down the power on these certain buildings, cursed buildings, buildings that are set up for drawing down occult power. The city of DC literally was built as a massive ritualistic chessboard to do public rituals en masse.